If you live in Australia or visit Australia and you've traveled around the country, more than likely you had a chance to see a dingo. But what do you really know about them? Did you know that there's a dingo fence in Australia that's about 3,500 miles long? That's right, 3,500 miles long. In today's episode, Kylie Cairns joins me. She's a dingo conservationist and an educator. She's focused on rescue and rehabilitation of these wild canines, and we talk really cool things that are all dingo. These medium-sized dogs are highly intelligent and they're very independent. Now, you can't just go and adopt a dingo pup. They really like the wild, and by the way, me too. Ecologically, they're really, really important as they control the fox and feral cat population in Australia and so much more. Now, the First Nations people revere them as protectors and companions. Dingoes are part of the land and their culture. And we get into their history, their importance, and the misconception of these really, really interesting canines. Did you know that dingoes really don't bark that much? They prefer the howl. So, like the dingo, I think you will be howling to everyone about how cool Kylie is, and you'll be a bit more wild now as you have now met the dingo.
For real, 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 for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange. Losses and gains, from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the For Real podcast. Today, my guest is, you're going to kind of recognize the name Kylie, like Kyle, Kylie Cairns. Kylie, welcome to the show. We're going to have fun. We're going to talk about something I've been wanting to talk a long time. Everybody calls me a dingbat, but we're going to talk about a dingo. So we're just go from there. Welcome to the show. How are you? How you doing today?
I'm really excited to be here. Really good.
I'm actually more excited for you to be here, Darren, and I know you're not that excited to be stuck talking to me. But as I always tell everybody when I start this thing, what I love to do is I want to talk about you because I want the audience to get to know you, your background, and how we got to dingoes and all that. So let's just talk about you growing up, how you became, this wild dog, fox, wolf. I know it's a dog, but we're going to get into that too. But how you got to where you're going, and just have fun.
I grew up in the US, which I think you might be able to tell from my voice. And I moved
Every now and then.
Yeah, and I moved to Australia in 1998 when I was around 11. And I just love wildlife. I love animals. I love dogs. I have pet dogs. I've had dogs my whole life. So when it came to, finding a career, it had to be something about animals. But I couldn't be a vet. I didn't get high enough marks in high school. So I went into science and I just love it. I love being able to spend my day and my time answering questions and investigating things. So that became my passion, and I kind of fell into studying dingoes because I wanted to do something about dogs, but I knew a guy who worked in a lab next to me when I was doing uni that worked on dingoes, and the opportunity came up to work with him. So I was like, oh, well, dingoes are kind of like dogs, so I guess that would be similar. And I guess the rest is history. I just became so impassioned with studying them and learning more about them, and also doing what I can to help with their conservation in Australia, because I think they're a really misunderstood animal.
And that's what I really want to get into. But here's a question I told you I was going to bounce. Here's a question that has nothing to do with animals because you're an American Australian. So do you like Vegemite? I just want
to... So when I first moved to Australia, I think I had to try it, and it was disgusting. Yeah. I think it's really something that you kind of have to grow up with. So my kids they love it. They'll slather it on their sandwiches and, have it on crumpets and stuff. My daughter had it on her crumpets this morning, but I can have it, but it has to be in very specific circumstances. So only with butter on toast with cheese. That's it. No plain Vegemite.
Well, first of all, it looks like axle grease, number one.
Yeah.
I remember so I think I told you I played rugby for the U.S. team, so I spent a lot of time down there. And I remember the very first time I saw it was actually on an airplane. It was part of the snack. I'm looking at this thing, what is this horrible thing? And I have a lot, I have really, really lots of Australian friends, and everybody down there loves that. I cannot figure out. I know it's got protein. They did the best marketing plan of any company's ever done, because when you look at that stuff, it's like there's not a chance in the world I'd ever have that again. I tried it. That was it.
I wonder if it's like the British thing, because like British people have Marmite, and I
Yeah,
think it's vaguely similar to
vaguely, yeah,
Vegemite. It's like the leftover products from making some sort of yeast thing, probably beer.
yeah.
They were like, what can we turn this bottom of the barrel stuff into? Ooh, spread.
So I think people that actually eat that Vegemite stuff are dingoes, but regardless of that. But anyways, that's me. But let's talk dingoes. So let's talk about their history. I know they've been there for a long time. And it's really their whole story. The more I was doing my homework for this thing, it's pretty amazing that, and get into their story and how they became an apex, which is unbelievable to me, apex predator. When you think about how they started and what they did it. So the, you're the chef. Tell us, give us the meal.
All right. Well, so I mean, I think something that people have to understand about Australia before we get into dingoes is that we're quite a unique continent. Most of our mammals are marsupials, so they have pouch babies instead of giving
Right.
birth to older young, like placentals. So that's quite unique. And we had quite a lot of large predators that were marsupials. So marsupial lions, marsupial tigery things, giant
Oh,
marsupials.
they have marsupial lions?
Yeah, well, they were not cats, but they were like they vaguely looked like cats, so that's what the people called them, when
Okay.
we discovered them.
Okay.
But those haven't been present on the Australian continent for more than 50,000
Yeah,
years.
that's the tiger. What's that tiger? That's the one that everybody thought they keep
So we have
the Loch Ness tiger.
the Tasmanian tiger, but that was still present when Europeans came to Australia.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Only in Tasmania, though.
Yeah, yeah.
But like there were much, much larger mammalian predators, but they all kind of went extinct like 50, 40,000 years ago. And so we had this large continent with lots of prey, but not very many predators left. And so by the time dingoes came to Australia, there was like this open landscape for them to enter into and then fulfill that role of apex or top predator. And
Right.
that's probably why they've been so successful, is because there wasn't anything else in that same like size or type that they were competing against. It was like they had an open niche.
Right. And so when they got there, and my reading and comprehension level is usually very low. So, but anyways, I was reading it. So when they came from Southeast Asia, probably China or somewhere like that, is what they're saying. I think 3 to 5,000 years ago. Is that roughly right?
So when we try to think about when dingoes came to Australia, I think it's a very open-ended question still, because there were no
Right.
recorded histories right at that point in time to know exactly where they came from. So what we can get some information about is looking at the fossil record and also using ancient DNA or genetics to sort of unravel that. So from the fossils, we know that the oldest fossil that we found is about 3,500 years old. And that was found in the far southwest part of the continent. So basically very, very far away from where dingoes would have potentially entered Australia.
Right. Wow.
So that tells us that dingoes were certainly present and spread across Australia by 3,500 years ago. And then when we study the genetics, that can tell us a little bit more about where they came and more information about when they might have split off from other canids or dogs. So the genetic studies have indicated that they split off about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago from the main dog lineage. So at that point in time, dingoes became their own thing, their own lineage.
Right.
And then they moved through the islands down into Australia, through Asia. But their ancestor came from Asia.
The original dog.
The original dog, but there were different types of dogs, right? There were Asian dogs, and then there were Eurasian or Western dogs.
Hmm.
And dingoes come from that Eastern Asian dog type, not the Western Eurasian one. So if you think about most of the dogs we have today, like German Shepherds, Labradors, poodles, any of those, they are all mostly from that Western dog type that's been very successful and heavily domesticated by people, whereas dingoes came from this different Asian type of dog that really only exists today in these village dogs that we see in through Southeast Asia.
Hey, one thing I read was that, most people think that as time's gone on that there are no pure dingoes left, but there still are some apparently, right? Which I think is really cool.
Yeah, so that's what most of my research is about,
Oh,
actually,
good.
about hybridization between dogs and dingoes in the landscape. So in the 90s, we were studying hybridization in dingoes using, at the time, cutting edge DNA technology, but it used between 15 and 23 DNA markers. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it basically is like 23 bits across the genome
Yeah.
that we could use to look at
23andMe.
23andMe. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what we were using. And when we used that method, we found evidence that there was a lot of hybridization going on. In fact, there was some suggestion that in Eastern Australia, so the part where most people live now, where like I live, New South Wales, Sydney, that sort of area, that there were very few pure dingoes left, like 1% of the population were pure, something like that. However, something that frequently gets misunderstood is that we did know that there was still plenty of dingoes in Central Australia and like Western and Northern Australia. It's just really in that eastern, southern part of Australia that we were worried about hybridization. Anyway, fast forward 20, 25 years, and my research, was being carried out. And we, instead of looking at only 23 markers, we looked at 195,000 DNA markers across
Wow.
the genome. So like a huge change. And that's just because
Technology.
genetics technology has come along so far.
Yeah.
And what we found instead is that whilst there is some gene flow or mixing between dingoes and dogs, it's far less common than we thought. So instead of it being like 1% of the population being, pure, it's more like 70 to 80% of the population being pure, depending on where you are.
Oh, wow.
And that the places where there is mixing at the moment between dingoes and dogs, it's really in areas where the dingoes are being controlled or killed to manage their impacts on livestock. And where there's also people with pet dogs in the area, obviously, because you can't breed with a dog unless there's dogs present.
I think it's for me at least because being here in the States, everybody knows what a dingo is. It's amazing because are they only in Australia? Are they in Tasmania as well, which is part of you guys? But it's only on just on you
Only on the mainland of Australia.
which is pretty wild how well known they are if you really think about it. They're a wild dog at some level, and we can get into specifically what they are. But the fact that they're so well known, it's interesting, and I'm not quite sure why that is if you really think about it, because there's so many other weird dog things out there that you just don't know about.
I'm really sorry if you can hear dogs growling in the background. My two dogs are
Now,
fighting.
my dog has to be a part of every show that I'm on. So good, I'm sorry.
They're putting on a wild dog show.
My dog's in the background. That's hilarious.
I think you were asking about
Why they're so well known.
they're so quintessentially Australian. I think in any country, the predators become something that's really visual and important to a lot of human communities. Like it's important through history because we needed to protect our livestock from those predators, and also we were scared of those predators.
Right.
So they became something that we told a lot of stories about, and we made that we communicated a lot about because we were fearful of them. And so I think that when people came to Australia, dingoes were something that we talked a lot about. You know, they were public enemy number one for a lot of time, for, you know, when Europeans came here, because they killed sheep. And so there was a lot of attention on getting rid of them. And that has led to, you know, a lot of discussion about them.
Right.
Also, unfortunately, they've gotten a bad rap for a couple of incidents that have happened that have gone global in
Right.
the media. Like, for example, the dingo that may have taken the baby, Azaria Chamberlain.
Yeah, everybody always hears about it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of been debunked a lot, but they don't know for sure still, right?
I mean, I think it's clear that it wasn't the mother
Right.
who killed her baby. And it is quite likely that a dingo was involved in some way.
Right. With a wild animal.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that really explains why they're so well known. And I think a lot of Australians consider dingoes to be a very important Australian animal. And we're quite proud of them in many ways. But at the same time, they have this dual nature where they also are not valued on agricultural land, obviously, same as wolves or coyotes.
Well, by the way, and that's what. And again, this will take us off track, but it's on the same subject. So you know, when I think about it, when I was doing my homework, yeah, because they're important to the environment and ecological balance, right? It's similar to when they got rid of all the wolves in Yellowstone, and then all of a sudden, when they brought them back, the environment came back because, and they were doing the main reason they were getting rid of them is again for people grazing cattle and things like that was a big portion of that, right? And you know, when I started looking into this, yeah, and I guess we should get into it. The reason why they're considered where they balance everything out is there, and I'm going to ask you about that, is the feral cats and the fox and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Is there that many feral cats in Australia? Every time I read about feral cats in Australia, I'm going, I've been there. I don't see a bunch of cats running around. I don't.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of feral cats in the bush.
Really?
But they're not. You wouldn't see them generally walking around,
Right.
because they're quite a elusive,
Right.
you know, predator. And I think that's one of the problems, again, when I was talking about dingoes and how they came here and there weren't that many predators, how they successfully then, you know, became so enmeshed in the environment. At the same time, that also has contributed to the success of foxes and cats, you know, spreading into the environment. There was less competition
Right.
with other predators. They had dingoes, of course, but very quickly, Europeans started suppressing dingoes, and that allowed these smaller predators to, you know, be more successful in spreading.
Right.
You know, that they were also successful just because there was so much, such productive environments, lots of prey available, and because a lot of those prey animals, you know, the little cute Australian marsupials, they're just not adapted to the types of predators like foxes and cats and the way that they hunt because they didn't evolve with them. And so they're naive to them. They don't have that inherent ingrained behavior to avoid cats and foxes in the same way that they do to like quolls, which is our native
Right.
small marsupial
Right.
carnivore.
Yeah.
And so they don't recognize the signs that a fox or a cat is there, and so they don't respond appropriately, and that makes them vulnerable. And so foxes and cats have been very successful at spreading into the environment, all across the environment, and have caused many species of reptile and birds and mammals to go extinct since they're coming.
And when they're being, because we can talk into about the dingo wall and there's a fence or whatever, and in the farm, it's always the cattle guys, right, that are always fighting against these guys for the most part. I guess sheep as well too, and then it's also that they help keep the kangaroos from destroying the land, right? Too, is that what they're doing?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've done a lot of ecological study about you know, the role of dingoes in the environment. And
Uh-huh.
some of that has been really helped, unfortunately, by the presence of this barrier fence that we have that's the largest human-made structure in the world. It's over 5,000 kilometers long, and it runs from the coast in Queensland all the way down to the coast in South Australia. And it's basically a fence, you know, 1.5 meters high in most places. Sometimes it's
Donald Trump would be thrilled to have one of those.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't think it's not that effective in the sense that like a dingo could jump over it if they wanted to,
Yeah.
but it's like a barrier in the sand of like if there's a dingo south of that fence, you're not going to be tolerated. We do baiting, we do trapping, we do shooting, all that stuff, right? So
Okay. But talk about the fence real quick. That was 1880 that they did, in the 1800s that they did, late 1800s, right?
well, they started it. I wouldn't have been like completed, I don't
Okay.
think. And I think it originally started as a rabbit proof fence to try to stop the spread of rabbits.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, we'll call it the dingo proof fence now, sort of thing, because dingoes are the bigger enemy. But anyway, we have this barrier fence, and it's been useful to scientists because we can then study the environment on either sides of the fence
Oh,
that basically
that's
has
interesting.
lots of dingoes versus not very many dingoes. And we can look at these broad patterns about, the different types of prey animals that are persisting in different environments, and also the types of plants or the shape of the landscape. And we've found that the removal of dingo, or I haven't, but scientists have found that the removal of dingoes from the landscape has been so pervasively affecting the environment that it's even changed things like the shape of sand dunes. And that's because when we remove dingoes from the landscape, we have more kangaroos, means that they eat more and different types of plants,
Right.
and that changes the way that the sand moves. Obviously, if there's more or less, root structure holding sand in or whatever,
Right.
that changes the way the sand moves. So it changes the shape and the structure of those sand dunes. So, it's really amazing that we can study these things, but from it, we also have learned how important dingoes are to making sure that our Australian ecosystems are resilient and diverse into the future.
Right.
Because we can see from some of these studies that removing dingoes can actually benefit foxes and cats. And that's because, you generally have a larger predator will suppress a smaller predator, particularly, a large canid like a dingo will suppress a smaller canid like a fox, or in North America, that would be wolves suppressing coyotes, etc.
Right.
And so when you remove that top predator, you remove that suppression. And so you may have an increased amount of foxes or cats in the landscape. And that's obviously detrimental to, smaller prey items or little marsupials and rodents.
Right.
The other way that they impact this is that when there's more dingoes, there's less kangaroos, and then there's less herbivory. And so then there's more like plant structure or habitat for these small rodents and marsupials, etc., for hiding from foxes and cats. And so there's sort of multiple ways that dingoes shape the environment that can be beneficial to, some of those animals that we really want to preserve in the environment that foxes and cats are causing to go into extinction.
For real, 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 for real.
And we'll be right back. A quick message from today's sponsor, the ASPCA Pet Insurance Program. Now, any pet parent knows life with a pet is full of surprises. Like finding one of your shoes in the backyard, and I've had this one with my dog Mabel, a surprise pet visit, which means a surprise bill I had not budgeted. That's why you should check out ASPCA Pet Health Insurance. Their plan is really flexible, it's easy to customize, and it really helps you prepare for those surprise pet visits. And even cooler, there's a special perk for signing up. When you enroll in ASPCA Pet Health Program, you can get $25 Amazon gift card. It's a little treat for you while you are doing something great for your pet. Now, to explore the coverage, visit aspcapetinsurance.com/for-real. That's aspcapetinsurance.com/for-real. Eligibility and restrictions apply, so visit aspcapetinsurance.com/Amazon terms for more info. This is a paid advertisement. Insurance is underwritten by either Independence American Insurance Company or United States Fire Insurance Company and produced by PTZ Insurance Agency Limited. The ASPCA is not an insurer and it's not engaged in the business of insurance.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at prepvet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
When they got rid of the wolves in Yellowstone, the crazy thing is it's this cascading event, right? Which is exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so what happened is the cattle started going into the rivers, which got ruined the banks, but also affected the fish. I mean, it just keeps going and going and going, which is the same thing here, even though that they weren't necessarily, I guess at this point, they would be considered native of Australia, but they balanced the system.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, when humans get involved, we always try to fix everything, but at the end of the day, we're always breaking things for the most part, in my mind.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, I think we often think that we know how things work better than that we actually do. And so we end up, we're fixing it. We're fixing it. We're making it better by removing predators, but that creates other problems that we haven't appreciated, and then we just break the system.
Right.
And even when we try to fix it by, for example, in Yellowstone, putting wolves back, that doesn't necessarily change it back to the way that it was before.
No.
We're changing it again.
Right.
That might be changing it back closer to what it was, but we can't fix things back and put it back to a baseline. That's not how ecology or biology works.
Yeah, that's sad.
So yeah, I mean, it is like, we know from studying the ecology of dingoes that they are really important for the environment and they help balance ecosystems. So having them in places means that we have more marsupials, we have more birds, we have more reptiles. Those populations are holding on better when we have dingoes. And when we remove them, even if that benefits agriculture, it's going to have a negative consequence for, the natural environment. And so it's that really difficult balance of what do we do, because the environment rarely gets given a dollar value. And so it's not valued or preserved in the same way that we do agriculture. And I'm not saying that agriculture is not important. People need to eat things. But we can change the way that we're talking about it and managing that so that we're trying to protect both things rather than giving one only the benefit.
Well, generally, when you talk about agriculture, you're talking about people that have more money and they get to control, and that's where they get the money with the government that says, "Oh no, we need to get rid of these things because these guys are making more money on that thing," and without looking at the bigger picture. And by the way, I'm not bad mouthing anybody, but the reality is that's just what the reality is. It's how it is.
Yeah.
So let's do this, and I want to keep on this balance thing, but I want to talk a little bit about the dingo specifically, so people, even we've seen pictures of it, we can talk about how big they are and that kind of thing. And I also want to talk about how important they are to the indigenous culture, the Aborigines area. And I know you spent a lot of time with them, so let's talk about you out in the field hanging out with you and your dingo buddies.
Well, I mean, to profess this, I am a lab scientist, so most of my work is in the lab, and I, get people send me various samples in the mail, and then I do DNA stuff on them. Stuff sounds very technical. So most of my days are spent interacting with dingoes in an unpleasant way, in the sense that I get sent, bits of dead dingo in the mail, or blood, or, mouth swabs, sometimes scat. But I am very privileged because of my having worked in the field for a very long time and having talked to so many people that I get invited to go on field trips where we do actual hands-on stuff about dingoes, as well as visiting sanctuaries. So I'm very privileged that I've actually met quite a lot of dingoes now. Yeah. And I've also been involved in some field work. So there's a sanctuary in Melbourne, so down in Victoria, in the far southeast part of Australia. And I visit a number of dingoes there. One of my favorite ones is Wandy, who has a book written about him. Yeah. He's got a very interesting story where he was rescued from the bush after being dropped into somebody's backyard, probably by a eagle or a owl
Oh,
that sometimes eat dingo cubs. And people weren't sure what he was at the time. They thought he might have been a fox or a feral dog. And as soon as people who knew what dingoes looked like saw a picture of him, we were like, I mean, that's a dingo puppy. But at the time when Wandy was found, this was in 2019, I think, people thought that dingoes were extremely rare in the bush in Victoria. We thought that less than 1% of the animals in, the wild dogs in the bush were actually dingoes. So anyway, he got sent to a sanctuary and I DNA tested him and we found that he was in fact a dingo with no evidence of recent dog ancestry. And his story went viral. Like hundreds of thousands of people have heard about Wandy. He's got his own book. He's famous, but like I knew him before he was famous. So I feel very special. And I think they're truly amazing. When you sit in a space with dingoes, like they don't behave in the same way as dogs. I think a lot of people see them and they're like, oh, my dog is the same as that. They behave in the same way. That's it. But they don't behave in the same way. They are so intelligent. I haven't personally seen them because I don't have a dingo, but they're great at problem solving, which can be very challenging for people who have pet dingoes or who work in sanctuaries with
they
them.
figured out how to get away or whatever else. Yeah.
They figure out how to open most doors or gates. So you have to have very special locking systems often. There's one dingo I know named Ozzy who used to be able to figure out how to open up the fridge. So she would break herself out of her crate when she was traveling with people to do educational things. So she would break herself out of her crate and then she would go to the fridge to see what food she could get from the fridge.
That's awesome.
They have some dingoes also that they've done intelligence tests, basically, where they give them a puzzle, a 3-part puzzle where they have to, pull a bit and then push a bit and then flip something open to get a treat. And it's clear so they can see sort of how it works. Anyway, there's this one dingo that saw this puzzle and she solved it in 30 seconds. And then she got given it a second time and she pre-opened it all so that all she had to do was pull the last bit and the treat just dropped out.
Oh, that's great.
So she'd worked out the back of it. So they're so incredibly intelligent. And that's really important for them because they have to live in the environment and figure out how to catch food and find water in a very difficult environment. Like we have a lot of challenging ecosystems from desert to high mountain temperate
Right.
sort of situations, as well as the tropics. So yeah, they're truly amazing animals. They're also really beautiful. Like I love watching them move because they're so graceful. And when they run along the beach, you can see the difference in the way that they move compared to dogs. So they will do this single tracking though, where their back feet will go into their front paw prints.
Really?
So it looks like there's 2 paw prints moving along, whereas dogs tend to have 4 paw prints because their back ends tend to be different widths to their front end. So they make 4 paw prints. So anyway, they just move with such a grace when they're running. I just love watching them.
Do you think they evolved just to be, from a predator standpoint, to be so people, whoever their predator is there? I don't know if it's a Komodo dragon or some crazy thing that you guys have down there, but I wonder if that's what they did. Hey, are you familiar with the Free Ranging Dog Project?
Yes, in India,
in Morocco.
Morocco, okay. There's probably a number of them.
Yeah, I'm sure. And they were based out, I mean, it's a really interesting thing. And I always, the thing that I always think about when we're talking about it, but I still think about it is a dog happier being free range, which in other words, you're just cruising around doing whatever, or being domesticized and all that. But one of the things that they do when they're watching and they're doing the study with these dogs is figuring out how fast they can open up containers of food in there. And these dogs tend to figure it out really fast because they're not being handed food all the time. So they know how to get to all of that kind of stuff too.
Yeah. I think so. They've basically designed a whole bunch of experiments or puzzles that they give dogs, and they give wolves, and they give coyotes, and a range of animals, and they've given them to dingoes as well. And dingoes tend to fall more similarly in their abilities to solve problems as like wolves or coyotes. So like a wild animal that really needs to think for themselves. Whereas when they give those same sort of tests or puzzles to most domestic dogs, I don't know if they've been repeated with village dogs, but that would be super interesting. The domestic dogs tend to look at the person or the people to be like, can you help me solve this? Like open that for me.
Well, give it to me. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that that is a characteristic of these wild animals that have evolved and continued living in the wild without relying on humans. They have to rely on themselves or each other.
Right.
Um, and that has meant that they haven't, I guess, become more dumbed down. Because the way I think about it is domestic dogs have been created by humans through selection and breeding
Sure.
to create the perfect companions and, pooches. They're shaped to rely on us and fit into our homes and do the jobs that we want them to do. And that has had really big impacts on dogs. For example, dogs that have lived with humans for thousands of years have now adapted to the fact that we often feed them food that they wouldn't have naturally evolved to eat, like grains. So they now genetically have got the ability to metabolize or break down these carbohydrates that they wouldn't really have encountered or eaten when they were wild.
Huh.
So dogs have like many copies of these genes that can, help them with carbohydrate, whereas dingoes and wolves only have, the normal one gene that can cope with it. So that's just an example of how the way humans have shaped dogs into being great for us, but we've changed then their ability to, live in the environment in the same way.
Well, it kind of reminds me of, because they have to be smart. It's like us, right? So math. Everybody uses a calculator now or their phone to add things, and they're capable of doing it. But it's almost laziness at some level. But
Yeah.
it's already there. And so if I'm a domestic dog, if you're going to hand me food, I'm going to eat it. Yeah, I don't have to go out and open something and do it. Why would I do that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like the typical like puppy dog eyes, where dogs will like stare
Yeah.
into your eyes, and they have like there's been structural changes to the muscles around their eyes to allow them
Oh,
to
really?
like make that puppy dog eye look.
Really?
That's obviously been successful
Yeah.
in, furthering their relationship with humans. And for example, gazing, where dogs will look into humans' eyes to build that rapport or relationship.
Right.
Dogs will do that for 10 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever. Dingoes, the maximum that a dingo would gaze into somebody's eyes is about 6 seconds, whereas wolves and coyotes, like, they rarely gaze into a person's eyes at all.
Yeah.
That's just not on their repertoire. So dingoes are kind of like that intermediate.
Yeah. They're kind of trying to figure out who they are.
Yeah, and that probably goes back to their ancestors being some sort of early dog that may have had some relationship with humans, but certainly not the type of relationship that our dogs today have. It's unlikely that the ancestors of dingoes was completely reliant on humans. Maybe they lived alongside them in some way or used them for a food resource, went to their dump or whatever and got food. But they weren't controlled and like bred like the way domestic dogs are. And even free ranging dogs that we have in Asia, those animals are still reliant on people. I think a lot of people maybe don't appreciate this, but they're reliant on that.
They're eating all the garbage.
They're reliant on living in that human
Right.
landscape that we've created. And they're not very successful at moving into the wild.
Yeah.
Something that people don't realize in Australia, we have this huge landscape and we have all these dogs living out in the wild, right? And a lot of people think that there's some of those dogs are pet dogs that have gone into the bush, like border collies and Labradors and Kelpies.
Right.
They're off in the bush and living their life. But when we've studied this by doing DNA tests of animals caught in trapping programs across Australia, so we've tested like over 5,000 animals from this, less than 1%, so it's like 31 animals out of that 5,000 were actually feral dogs.
Oh,
So
wow.
there's just no evidence that dogs are successful at
I'm going,
living.
hey, I'm going to go hang out with those guys. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just not successful at living in the bush, and that's probably because of the harshness of the environment in Australia. You know, we have high temperatures in many places or temperature extremes, so it might be very cold during the winter. There's limited water resources in many places. And so, you know, you really have to know how to hunt and prey on things. And I think domestic dogs are just not as successful. They might be successful at living, but then the key part is to make a population is you have to breed.
Right.
And I think something that puts dingoes apart from domestic dogs that maybe you don't know about is that they only breed once a year, seasonally.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And domestic dogs will breed twice a year, and it's
Every time they're in heat.
yeah, every time they're in heat, and they mostly go in heat twice a year, but it's not seasonal. Like they kind of just go into heat more randomly throughout the year, and that's because there's no reason for them to restrict their breeding anymore because humans have food and they give them their food, and so they can
Right.
breed,
Oh.
you know, more frequently. Whereas dingoes can't do that.
Yeah, I've evolved to be able to drink my tequila. I think that's what it is. People kept giving me my tequila, and I said, okay, I guess I'm going to have to evolve to be a tequila drinker.
I get
That's what it was.
it. There you go.
Yeah, I get it. I understand. I've been one of those guys.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the Aborigine and what do they call it, Dreamtime and all that kind of stuff too,
Yeah.
because I'm fascinated by culture. You know, we have the Native Americans there. You guys have the Indigenous Aborigine. You know, any person I've ever met that's part of that are Aboriginal, I've just had such a great time talking to them and hanging out with them because tradition and all the stuff that goes along with that.
Yeah. So I want to say I'm not First Nation, so I don't want to
Well, me either,
you
obviously.
know, I'll talk generally about it, but I wouldn't give away any specific stories because those are not mine to give.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, by the way.
Yeah, but dingoes are really important to many Indigenous or First Nations peoples in Australia. They feature in their songlines or their dream stories, which is sort of like their mythology, sort of,
Right,
that explains how they perceive the landscape and how the landscape was created in their spirituality
right.
or their custom culture.
Talk to their ancestors.
So they're really important. They're also viewed as a totem animal
Right,
for many different Indigenous cultures in Australia. And I mean, I think that's a key point is there's many different Indigenous peoples in Australia. So there's not just one Indigenous type or person. There's many different groups around Australia, and they have different languages, and so they may view dingoes in different ways, or have different stories about them and how they may have played a role in human culture or in the landscape or in creating the environment. Those sorts of things. They're also viewed as kin by many Indigenous people. So
really. Like the coyote.
yeah, and that can be really challenging then because when we talk about dingoes in the landscape today, a lot of dingoes are being controlled, which is a pleasant way of saying we kill them in lots
Right,
of
the
places.
dingo
And
way.
so to Indigenous people, that can be really traumatizing because we're talking about or actually killing things that they would consider kin.
Yeah,
And I think that's something that doesn't get fully appreciated and discussed often in Australia when we're talking about managing them. We don't necessarily talk about the impact that that has on First Nations people because we just maybe some of us don't have the same connection with our culture
right.
that they do, and so we don't value it. And I think that's wrong. And I think we really do need to listen to more First Nations people about their views on dingoes and what they want done for dingoes on their country in their.
Absolutely, you should be. Yeah, that's wild. I'm thinking about I did an episode with on the wild buffalo, the last wild buffalo in Yellowstone, and because that's there when I had four guests on, and one was a Native American, and he would talk about his ancestors, which were at first I didn't understand what he was saying, but he was talking about the buffalo. because it's that important to them, and it's really important to their culture. They're revered and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah. Often, many different Indigenous peoples had different words for wild dingoes and camp dingoes. So, whilst most dingoes lived in the wild, in the bush, some people did take dingoes from the bush as pups and then rear them as companion animals in their camps or in their, homes.
Right.
And that's something that some people misinterpret it as being domestication, and that's not to undervalue that relationship that dingoes had with people. They were a key part of camps. They often helped women go hunting. They helped protect, the home areas and protect children. So they were a really key part, and clearly they were valued because there are burials as well where Indigenous people have buried dingoes by themselves or with people. So it shows that they're a really deeply ingrained cultural part of First Nations peoples. But I think it's critical to understand as well that just because some dingoes lived with people does not mean that all dingoes live with people. And I think that First Nations people recognize that as well. They have these different words for them. And something that is interesting about that is that the word dingo comes from an Indigenous word from Sydney, where the first white colonists came, and they were heard people talking about the camp dingoes as tingos, and so that's the word that we started using. We instead of tingo, we call them
Yeah,
dingo.
of course.
But it's kind of wrong because that word was more referring to camp dingoes when, now we use that word to refer to all dingoes. But warrigal would be one name, for example, of a wild dingo from the Gadigal people.
For real, 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 for real.
And we'll be right back.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at prepvet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
So let's touch on, because you're spending a lot of time understanding them. Let's talk on about the dingo wars with, the people that are calling and doing all that stuff that they're doing to get rid of them, because I know they, they just had that incident at the beach, but the girl probably drowned is what they're assuming, but they were there and they were being animals. But let's talk a little bit about the dingo wars and how, I guess it's about education, really let people understand that it's not what, I guess they've really had a really bad PR company for them for a long time. They need a better PR company, sounds like.
They have had a bad PR company, and it's been deliberate, I think,
Yeah.
is one of the key things that we've learned. So in Australia, a lot of times the government will use two different words to talk about dingoes, depending on what we're talking about. So if we're talking about conservation and we're talking about environment and places where dingoes can be dingoes, we will use the word dingo. But if we're talking about managing them or killing them, then the government tends to use the words wild dog to refer to them.
Feral wild dogs.
Wild dogs. And that language has been really widespread in all levels of government and the community for long periods of time. I think it really started to become more popular to refer to dingoes as wild dogs in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
And now you would be hard pressed to look at a government website and not find the word wild dog, particularly if you're on like an agricultural department website. And I think that has led to a level of misunderstanding from the general public and, more globally as well about what the animals in the wild actually are. And so, we can have a little bit of a history talk. So why did we start talking about wild dogs? It was because people became concerned about hybridization happening between dingoes and dogs. And we had that concern because there was this idea that hybrids, or the offspring of, a dingo and a dog breeding together, would be bigger, they would be more aggressive, they would be smarter, and they would be more likely to kill more livestock. And so we definitely didn't want them. And then there was another part to that, why rationale, which was that if we allow hybridization to be happening, and it's something that's happening, then it would be very bad for dingoes, because it's going to basically breed them into extinction, and we'll have no dingoes left. So in the 80s is when we first started having scientists really looking at this, from the 70s to the 80s. And we started by looking at their skulls. So we would get the skulls from dingoes. Often that required people to go out and trap dingoes, kill them, and then they would chop their heads off and take them back to the lab, where they would boil them down and then measure the bones. So it wasn't very effective for conservation breeding, because you had to breed the litters of pups, and then after it was all done, cut the head off and send the dingo up to the lab to get it tested. Hopefully after it had lived a long life. Anyway, so the skull morphology studies, they really started to show that in eastern and southern Australia, the dingoes were different than the dingoes in the desert and in northern Australia. And so the explanation for that at the time was that this is evidence of hybridization. This is evidence of the pervasive mixing of dogs into the wild dingoes. And then we had in the 90s the genetic revolution, right, where scientists started getting access to all of these cool genetics tools, and we could study the DNA. And so one of my PhD supervisors, who sadly passed away in 2011, he was the person who first brought this DNA study to dingoes. And he tested dingoes in the wild, and he also had like a set of captive dingoes that he used as a reference population to be like, this is what you need to look like genetically to be a dingo. And he also had, a set of dogs. So we tested them, and he developed this DNA test that we then used for decades to study dingoes around the country, to look at hybridization. And we thought from that work that hybridization was really rampant, particularly in Eastern Australia, where there was a lot of concern also about dingoes being present, because that's where we have our prime sheep country,
right,
which is where we have the most amount of livestock loss then, presumably. So anyway, this concern about hybridization is what has led to this communication about wild dogs, right? Because there was basically this rationale put forward that, well, the animals in the wild are not really dingoes anymore, or most of them are not dingoes anymore. They're these, hybrids. And so we shouldn't call them dingoes. We should call them wild dogs, so that we're being more specific about what they are, and so that it's clear that we're not just killing dingoes, we're killing feral dogs and hybrids, which we don't want to have, right? And so that language has then persisted. And I think it's really troubling, because most of the general public does not realize that dingoes are targeted in lethal control programs. They think that there's different animals being killed,
right,
wild dogs are being killed, but dingoes are being protected. And there's this perception or idea that in national parks, dingoes are a native animal, so they're protected, but wild dogs are controlled. And that's a problem, because actually what's happening in national parks is wild dogs are controlled, but the definition of wild dog includes dingoes.
right.
So we are, of course, killing dingoes in our national parks, in places where they should be protected as a native animal.
Yeah, they've got terrible PR, because, it's funny.
Terrible PR.
Well, how here in the U.S. we have the wild horses, right? And there's a horse meat trade. And so what the cattle ranchers don't want the horses on their property. So the government has come up with a term, instead of wild dog, they're feral horses. They're the same horses, they're wild horses. But if you hear feral horses, feral denotes something that doesn't sound that good, right? And it's all the way they marketed the thing. And I don't see how you consider, because the horses are running on the pasture land, and they get, the ranchers get subsidies from the government, so they don't like this. It's the same idea. It's the same You got the dogs, we got the horse problem. It's the same idea.
I mean, we do have a feral horse problem too,
Yeah,
some parts of Australia, and they've done some major culls as a result of having the feral horses inside national parks.
right,
So, Australia does have a feral animal problem, and I guess that's one of the issues. Then is that dingoes kind of straddle this area between native and non-native.
right,
Very clearly, their ancestors came from outside of Australia. So by some really strict scientific definitions, they're not native,
right.
right? Because their ancestors came from outside. But in a changing world where we know things are being moved around by humans deliberately or accidentally, and in the circumstances where this happened thousands of years ago, and dingoes have then become integrated into the environment, it's not really the same thing as a fox being brought by Europeans 200 years ago, you know? And dingoes now have that role in the ecosystem, and we didn't have another large predator that was filling that role at the time either.
Well, let's just talk about the humans that are in Australia, except for the indigenous people. Are they natives? Because they're really not.
No, it's very fun. There's a political thing in Australia about boat people, right? Because
Yeah,
there's issues with people coming to Australia via boat seeking refugee status. Now, don't want to make a political statement about that, but what I would say is it's awfully funny for the Europeans to have a problem with it when we're the original boat people.
both
We
people,
came in
exactly.
and we effectively wanted to push the indigenous people
Right.
out of their country. We told them that it was terra nullius, like they
Yeah.
weren't the landowners. And we effectively proceeded to push them out and do horrific things to them. And we did horrific things to their dogs as well, which is dingoes, Part of that process of pushing people off the land also meant targeting dingoes, because we didn't want dingoes in places where we were putting our very precious sheep that we just shipped all the way from,
Right.
Britain. We wanted to protect those. And Australia is really unique because if we go back to that very few predators issue, farmers, when they came to Australia and realized that we could remove dingoes, and then there was really not that much that could threaten sheep. It was really kind of groundbreaking, I guess, for Europeans to realize that here was a landscape that was so productive, had never had domestic livestock on it, and we could put our sheep out in paddocks that would go great. We could, use them for meat, and then the wool was exceptionally valuable as well after a certain time point. And basically, Australia's economy was built off the back of sheep, and that's one of the reasons why sheep are so important and agriculture is so important in Australia historically, is that a lot of our economy and our success as a nation has been built off the back of the value of wool, and therefore the value of protecting sheep from dingoes. So we had, industrial scale lethal control programs carried out to kill dingoes. We have had baiting programs basically since Europeans came and developed good poisons for killing them. So we used to use strychnine, which is a horrifically inhumane poison. In some states, we are still allowed to use strychnine to kill dingoes in certain circumstances. And then we got access to 1080, which is another poison that's very rarely used outside of Australia or New Zealand. And we use that in baits to control dingoes via dropping them out of airplanes over national parks and sometimes public land, private land. We also use those same baits to do ground baiting where, you would walk along a lane or whatever and put them out. Then we also have bounties where we pay money for people handing in scalps. Yeah, this has been going on for generations in Australia. And I think it's really troubling as a scientist studying them because we know now that they are dingoes. There's not as much hybridization as we thought. And the hybridization that is there is probably because dingoes are being threatened and challenged by this, this amount of lethal control, that it's increasing the amount of hybridization that might happen. And also restricting their ability to purge or get rid of these dog genes once it's in the population. That's a really complex thing. I know I've just kind of thrown it in there. We can talk about it
No,
more
no.
later.
I mean, it's fascinating. I was sitting there thinking and talking. You've lived in two countries where they all started with criminals.
Yeah, yes, yeah, exactly.
We're going to have indigenous people in both countries.
Yeah. No, I know it's not a great track record. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want. Sometimes I like to claim my Australian heritage because my dad is Australian, although he actually is British and immigrated to Australia when he was 13. So I'm more correctly, I would be British American. But I like to claim my Australian heritage quite
I would
strongly.
too.
I'm not a penal colony Australian.
I guarantee my family some penal colony for sure. But I don't know that I've ever met an Australian I don't like. So you're in a great place as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice.
So what else haven't we brought up? Is there anything else we haven't brought up that you can think of right now?
I mean, so we haven't really talked about, I guess, dingoes and their threat to humans.
Yeah, let's cover that a little
I
bit.
think that there's a lot of media attention about it at the moment because of the tragedy that happened on Gari,
Right.
where the young woman was found, and dingoes may or may not have played a role in her death. Certainly, there was evidence that there was post-mortem damage to her body from dingoes, which is normal animal behavior, as traumatic as it is, but it's unquestionable that dingoes may well have played a role in her death, and we don't know, and we need to let that play out. But because of that, there's been a lot of discussion about how much of a threat dingoes play to humans in general. And I think it's an interesting, it's a question I get asked a lot because there are so many dingoes in Australia, on the mainland, and we hear nothing about attacks.
Right.
Attacks from dingoes are extremely uncommon. Dingoes do not generally approach people, and they do not generally pose a threat to people on the mainland. And that's because dingoes are a shy animal. They would far prefer to just be as far away from people as they possibly can. Some of them have probably have experienced traps and shooting and stuff. So, they don't really have a reason to approach people, so they don't generally do that. There may be different times where they might. So if you go out hunting in a natural landscape and you have dogs with you, they may come close to investigate the dogs or to investigate you if you're approaching a den site. I think that's no different from any other predator.
Right.
When they tend to be
Protective.
territorial or protective of their young or their home territory. But still, instances of attacks on people are extremely uncommon. I mean, I think we could count on our hands the number of people that have died as a result of dingoes, since European colonization. However, on Gari, the situation is a bit different. And that's because we have so many people visiting what is a very, very small area. So the whole island is 1,600 square kilometers, which is not that big. I think it's like 9 miles or something from tip to tip. So it's not very big. There's about 100 to 200 dingoes on the island. And throughout a year, I think something like 400,000 to 800,000 people visit it. So there's a lot of people on that island. And that means that the dingoes are more habituated, they're more used to people, and they're more used to people giving them access to food. And so that is when it becomes more risky for the humans in that equation, because you have a large predator. Often people don't respect them like a large predator. They think, oh, it looks like a Labrador. Like, I'll get a cute selfie with it. I'll encourage it to come close to me with some food. And the dingoes on Gari are quite happy to come close and get food because they know that that's where they can get a free meal.
Right, free meal.
And then they might start behaving challengingly. So if they don't get food and they know there's food around, then they might start getting mouthy or nippy or just threatening in a behavior that you don't want. And I think also because they're not scared of people and people don't respect them as a predator, they put themselves into situations where they might be more vulnerable.
Yeah.
and their children might be more vulnerable. So like leaving their kids unsupervised or, out of arm's reach in an area where there's a large predator. I think you wouldn't do that if you were hiking through Yellowstone, for example, and you knew that there were wolves or bears or cougars. Like you're going to be a lot more protective of your children. And I think part of the problem is that dingoes are only 20 kilos. I don't know how much that is in pounds, but they're
40 pounds, up to about 40 pounds.
yeah, so I mean, they're not a huge predator, and so I think people don't necessarily appreciate the damage that they could do to small people like children.
Right.
And then I guess most of the time on Gari, still you have people moving around as groups, because they're camping and they're hanging out with people. The risk is really only increased when you're alone or doing something that would like amplify that prey drive in a predator. So like running or being on the beach and splashing around or something. And that's one of the reasons why the QPWS rangers have suggested that people who visit Gari follow a set of guidelines. Those guidelines include not being alone, not definitely not going for runs on the beaches during dawn and dusk, or carrying dingo sticks with you, which is basically a long stick for if a dingo gets too close to you or is frightening you, and making sure that you secure your food and supervising children very closely. So I think if people follow those guidelines, the risk to humans is very, very low. And I think on the mainland as well, we know dingoes very, very rarely approach or hurt people. So we don't need to be frightened of them, but we do need to respect them as a large predator.
I mean,
Yeah,
well, logic is really hard to figure out sometimes.
I know.
But the reality is that, when you talk about a small island, it's one thing. So if you know you're going to an island that they're threatened by that and people have been giving them food and they're less scared, it's like going to, I think your example is perfect. And when you talk about Yellowstone, people know if you got food, you got to put it up. You don't have things there because they're used to seeing you. But if you go to the mainland, everything I read about it, because I did a dive into after hearing about the girl that was on the beach and all that kind of stuff, and there's very little documentation of bad things happening with dingoes. There's just very little of it, and generally it's had to do with food for the most part, or they were feeling threatened. And guess what? A cat will do that to you here in the U.S. because if they feel like they're cornered, they're going to scratch you. But it's just simple stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and if you're looking at risk, like you're far more likely to be attacked in your own home by your own dog
Right.
than you are by a dingo. I think it's just unfortunate that the incident on Gari that just happened in the same week that I think we had 4 shark attacks in 2 days. So there was a lot of hysteria about predators in general.
Right.
And that really, unfortunately, the dingoes that were associated with the poor woman's death have all been euthanized as well.
Well, again, dingoes just to have a really crappy PR company is what they do.
I probably shouldn't say this, but I think it's quite likely politically motivated. Like it wasn't evidence-based, that decision. I mean, if they were basing that decision on evidence, then they wouldn't have killed those animals because they know that the population is so inbred that removing 10 animals could be
Right.
very bad. And also that whilst some of the animals may have been at fault, it's unlikely all of them were, and that removing an entire family group is likely to lead to more like territorial disputes between dingoes and all those sorts of things, and more disruption to the population. But there's a lot of concern, particularly because of the amount of media attention about dissuading visitors from accessing the island. And with the Olympics coming up, I think there would be a lot of attention on trying to make sure that Queensland and Gari are safe for visitors to come and frolic on the beach. So unfortunately, a case of animals doing wild animal things and being punished for it, for not very good reasons. But
Generally, bad things generally happen if money has to be involved. So when you're talking about tourism or anything else that has to do with money, You talk about the sheep farmers, that has to do with money. All of it's there. I mean, but you have to kind of learn to coexist, I guess, at the end of the day, is what figuring out how to do that.
Yeah, and I mean going to the sheep farming thing, there's been scientists looking in Australia but also globally about how do we better live with these predators? Like how do we have livestock in similar areas to where we have predators without just killing all the predators? And people are pretty good at problem solving, and we've been doing some of these things for very long periods of time. Unfortunately, some of those things just haven't like really been picked up in Australia, and I think that goes back to because we didn't have to, because we only had one predator, so we could easily kind of get rid of them or try to get rid of them. We didn't have to deal with the predators as well.
Hmm.
But things like using livestock guardian dogs or even donkeys to protect the livestock, they're really effective. We know they can protect livestock from wolves.
The Bankar dog is exact example of that. And now, they're doing, I forget what dog it is, up in Montana. The grizzlies were starting to come, and now they brought some old farmer brought these dogs back, and now the dogs are living with the family. They have no issues with the grizzlies now.
Yep. Yep, yep. There's a study, Voyagers Wolf
Hmm.
Project. I think it's in. I'm going to get it wrong. I think it's Minnesota, but it might be Wisconsin. But it's in Voyagers National Park, and they set up some maremas to help protect cattle in this property that's like surrounded by the national park. And they were having issues with the wolves entering the paddocks and taking down calves. And they've introduced these. First, they put good fences up to like a barrier fence, and then they put the livestock guardian dogs in, and they've had like no losses for I think several years since those dogs have gone in. So I mean, they're really effective if you do them. I think one of the issues in Australia is the scale of the agricultural farming that we're doing. So we have sheep properties that are like thousands and thousands of
Hector,
hectares or acres, and some of them are not fenced. It's literally a matter of putting the sheep in the area
right?
and coming back and mustering them later, or putting the cattle in the area and coming back and mustering them later. Um, and so they're effectively being unprotected completely. Now, cattle don't do pretty well with dingoes. Because they protect their livestock, but sheep don't. Sheep are
Well, sheep are sheep.
not not very resilient, not very resilient to predators. So we really do need to protect them, and that's a problem because if we're farming at such high levels, you can't put dogs out in those areas. But first of all, the conditions are too harsh for them, and second, you wouldn't be able to feed the dogs because there's such large distances we're talking about. So it's a real challenge finding something that will work. But I think that for most properties that are doing farming, they're not such large scale. There are tools that we can put in place that can keep livestock safe or safer
Right.
than they currently are, and that we can then have dingoes living in natural places. And I don't necessarily mean accepting dingoes living on your farm next to you, but like national parks should be places where native animals, or at least animals that are ecologically important to the biodiversity of Australia, should be allowed to
Be
be
protected.
present.
Hey, did you know that on that dingo fence that Australia spends over $1 million a year to keep that fence fixed? $1 million for a fence.
Yeah, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. And I think we may have just spent several millions, maybe in the 20s, rebuilding parts of the fence. Or like, zhuzhing it up because it was starting to fall down, like there's been fires and floods and all that
It's
stuff.
like 200 years old. I mean, it's crazy.
It's very funny when you see photos of like parts of the fence, and you're like, that's not going to keep anything out. Um, and I think then the government comes and spends $1 million repairing a 100-kilometer section of it or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the fence doesn't really act as a barrier. Like it's not like the Great Wall of China or something. Dingoes could go over it if they wanted to, if the incentive was high enough. But it's sort of a line in the sand for where we're going to tolerate dingoes and where we're not.
It's like a divider.
And like south of that fence, like on the New South Wales side of that fence, you would have trappers working along the fence and trying to catch any dingoes that come over or any dingoes that are persisting. And I mean, the number of dingoes that are living in some of those, there'd be basically no dingoes living close to that fence anymore, because we also put the poisons out. So
Yeah, they know.
I think there's perception that we have many, many more dingoes than we actually do as well. I mean, really, dingoes are only living in good populations inside national parks, or in areas that are very remote, north of the fence, like cattle country. Dingoes are probably living more, on leasehold land. But there's not, despite the fact that there probably are thousands of dingoes, there's not hundreds of thousands of dingoes. You're privileged if you go out in the bush and you see a dingo.
Well, everything I looked at when I was looking at what the numbers, nobody really knows. It's just an estimate, and the estimate it's such a wide range of numbers that nobody really even knows. It's crazy.
No, I mean they've done an estimate, for example, in Victoria, and that number is somewhere from like 1,500 to 5,000 animals.
Yeah, I know.
Pretty crazy estimate. But like, and I mean that makes it sound like, oh, there's a lot of dingoes out there, and there may well be, but something that we're starting to appreciate more with our DNA study of them is that dingoes are really challenged by inbreeding. So when dingoes came to Australia, there wouldn't have been very many of them,
Right.
and so there was a small foundation population, or populations if more than one population came, and then they started to increase, as they spread across the country. But because of that small population, they haven't reached high enough numbers yet to kind of recover from that challenge, like historically as a species. And then in the last 200 years, we've done a really good job of killing them and suppressing them, and that has further exacerbated or made worse this inbreeding challenge in certain areas.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And going back, I think I alluded to this a little bit before about the hybridization. So a lot of people view hybridization as negative, and I think generally it is. It's something that we want to avoid. If humans are influencing it, we don't want that to happen, and we definitely don't want hybridization to be happening to the point that it's erasing, a population that was unique or something like that.
Right.
But something that people may not appreciate as much is that hybridization can also be a tool for animals to adapt to challenges or things that are changing that they might not have the current tools to do. So it's a way for them to get new genetic material for evolution to act upon.
Right.
And so whilst hybridization has challenged dingoes in the past, we know that it has happened, even though it's not as common as we thought. It would appear that some of these dog genes that have gone into the population are then being positively selected and retained by dingoes. And that may well be because it's providing new genetic material. It's providing new diversity, so new variation to overcome this inbreeding.
Inbreeding, right.
That really they needed. And so it's kind of this double-edged sword of we know hybridization has happened and that's bad. But at the same time, hybridization may actually be helping dingoes to hold on in places where they're being really,
Right.
really suppressed by
Yeah.
lethal control and stuff. So, and I think, all of our ideas about speciation and species are often predicated on the idea that animals can't reproduce together if they're different species. But that's quite an outdated idea that's wrong. So, for example, humans have Neanderthal DNA in us from our ancient ancestors breeding with Neanderthals. And we have retained and kept some of those genetic genes or alleles that we got from Neanderthals because they've been useful to us. The same thing happened with grizzly bears and polar bears in North America. There was a gene exchange during the last ice age that allowed, I can't remember which way it was, one of them to adapt to the rapid change in climate. and they've retained their separate identities, but they still have shared DNA in some, in some regions because of that
Right.
ancient mixture.
Well, that's interesting.
And like more contemporarily, like jackrabbits and snowshoe hares are breeding together, and that's benefiting the snowshoe hares because there's not enough snow in some areas anymore, and being white in an area where there's no snow is very bad. So they've actually gained the alleles for alternative winter pelage colors. So like I think it's like gray color, that provides them with the ability to like keep going
Right.
in areas where the climate is changing and there's not enough snow. So like hybridization can be good.
Right.
And I think that's something else, like some complexity that needs to get added into this whole wild dog dingo thing.
Well, I think that whole wild dog thing was a marketing program to say they're going to be vicious and horrible animals is what it was. I mean, I think you should try to protect the purity of the animal, but that was a marketing program, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I didn't talk about it, but something that's super fascinating is that people were so concerned about the breeding between dingoes and dogs that Australia actually banned the importation of Alsatians or German Shepherds into the country for something like 30 or 40 years. You were not allowed to have German Shepherds, and they were strictly controlled because of concern that German Shepherds would breed with dingoes and create monster sheep killers. There were like media campaigns about the banning. Like it was talked about in Parliament. It's yeah, fascinating and interesting. The level of concern that we had, and yet,
Yeah.
if you look out in the bush, you can see dingoes all like look like dingoes. Like you don't see the dogs that you see in free ranging populations like
Right.
in Morocco or India. You don't see dogs like that roaming around the bush. Or it's very, very uncommon to see that. Like you just see dingoes. Sometimes they have weird coat colors. Like there might be black with patches of white all over them, or they might be brindle. So that's like that brownie color with black
Right.
stripes or whatever.
Camouflage.
But like if you painted them the typical yellow ginger color, you wouldn't see a difference. People just need to look past the color sometimes, and appreciate that dingoes can come in different colors as well. They don't always have to be
Exactly.
that ginger color.
I know.
But yeah,
This is fascinating. Okay, so anything else you can think of? I mean, we could talk for days, I'm sure,
I
but
think we could talk for days. I mean, they're so fascinating.
well, I told you, I forewarned you. And the advantage I have is, and of course you do too, because you're talking to animal people all the time. I am too. So I've got all these other little things, little bits and pieces of different animals that I've talked to. From your guys, your blue penguins down there across the board. I've talked to Tasmanian devil people, everything. So
Yeah.
a lot of marsupial people.
Yeah, well, I mean, most of our mammals are marsupials. I think the only ones that are not are rodents. We have a couple like native rodents that, and we have some bats. And that's pretty much it.
I wonder why that is. I wonder.
Well, they came from Asia,
Oh, okay.
but like million years ago, something like that, hundreds of thousands of years, million years ago. So, I mean, the movement of animals from Asia into Australia is not unique to dingoes. I guess the uniqueness is potentially the human hand. So we think there's likely a role in humans moving dingoes or the ancestor of dingoes from somewhere in Asia down through the islands to Australia.
Hmm.
But what that relationship was is kind of less clear. Like, were they keeping dogs as pets? Were they keeping them as food items, as many people in Asia use dogs as food? Like, or was it more, was it different? Could they have just had some that were companions, more similar to the way Indigenous Australians kept dingoes, where they
Hmm.
would have companion animals, but they weren't necessarily breeding them themselves. They were letting them breed in the wild and then taking pups back. It's kind of unclear. And I think the other thing is that the peoples in Asia thousands of years ago, they moved quite a lot of different animals around different islands, but none of them were domesticated. So like they moved like Rusa deer around, and there was also a particular monkey, I think, that got moved around by people Not really sure why. Maybe to make them feel like home or something.
Yeah,
I don't know. So it's not really clear what role humans had
yeah.
with dingoes. They may or may not have had. And I think also the way we think about Australia as like the island that it is today. I mean, 6,000 years ago, Australia was joined to New Guinea, and it was one giant landmass. And so it's quite likely that dingoes didn't come directly to Australia, but they came to like that New Guinea part of the landmass and then traveled down into Australia.
New Guinea singing dog.
Exactly. They're the dingoes like closest relative. They're basically like a extra population of dingoes. And they're so unique. All of them are so unique. They have very different vocalizations to domestic dogs. So like dingoes and New Guinea sing dogs howl and yodel a lot more. I mean, dogs can howl and yodel, but um, dingoes have a more complex vocalization repertoire than dogs, and they tend to not bark in the same way. They can bark.
Because one of the things I read is that they don't bark, but they do bark. They just don't bark that often, and it's not that loud.
Yeah, they don't bark that often, and the bark is used in a different way. So
Yeah,
it is an alarm thing, but they won't just.
like my dog.
Yeah, even the ones that are kept in captivity, they don't just sit there and bark. Like, so if I go to the sanctuary, one of my favorite things is if I spend the night at the sanctuary, waking up in the morning and them howling, and they have like a chorus howl, well, they'll all be howling.
Oh, that's cool.
But when visitors come, they don't bark. They howl if it's people that they are excited to see. Or if it's people they're not sure about, they'll snuff. So they'll kind of like blow air out of their nose, like chuffing and stuff, but they don't
Yeah.
bark so much. But it can be a learned behavior. So if you have like a pet dog and then you have a pet dingo, the dingo might learn to bark more because of association and, modeling. But they use their barking in a different way. And mostly you'll hear howling. And some of my favorite experiences are like camping in the bush and waking up to hear dingoes howling either in the night or in the morning. Just magical.
Yeah.
So privileged to have heard that, because not many people do in Australia hear that.
Okay, so how do people find you or want to find out if they want to dig deeper into this thing? What should they do? Anything that you would recommend? And by the way, anything you're going to tell me, I'm going to have you email to me and I'll put it in the description. But for people who are listening, if they want to find out more information, get a hold of you, find out anything, what should they do? Whatever you want to point them in.
Well, you can find me on the UNSW website. So if you search like Dr. Kylie Cairns, that will come up. I'll give you my email address, probably saying it will be difficult with like spelling and stuff. I also have a Facebook page called Dingo Genetics Research that I update spontaneously, depending on how much time I have, with research updates or things that are going on about dingoes that are cool. I used to be on Twitter, but I'm not on Twitter anymore. So just Facebook mostly. And like, I'm really happy to have emails and stuff from people. Just forgive me if I take a long time to respond sometimes.
Trust me, I know how that works. Totally.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so I've got my joke for you. And by the way, I know everybody that's listening, they're cringing. So as I always say, I'm the one that's giving the joke today. Of course, I always try to talk to guests in. But if you want to be on the show and you want to tell a joke, you've got kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, or you personally want to be on the show, if you email me at mkyle@forrealpodcast.com, I will gladly, and I'm sure the people listening would gladly love to hear somebody else tell a joke versus me or the guest. So again, mkyle@forrealpodcast.com. So my joke for you today, and everybody I know out there that's listening is cringing. So why was the dingo today hiding in the shade when we were doing this interview?
Oh, because they're smart? I don't know.
Well, that's clear. The reason being is they didn't want to go out back in the sun. I told you.
Oh, cringe.
But that was my joke. At least I put one together.
That's a good one. I might actually tell my kids that one. They'd probably enjoy that.
I can't even, my kids just look at me and say, Dad, don't tell me any more jokes. That's what I'm gonna say. Anyways, Kylie, thanks so much for being on the show. I love talking to somebody who has a similar name to mine, too, which makes it more fun. You're just a wealth of information. You're doing great things. So I really, really appreciate you for being on.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, it's been awesome. And then for everybody else that's listening, as I always say, like, pass the word on, follow, rate, whatever all those things you do. But the deal is that the more people that listen, the more opportunities I have to bring on more guests. Another thing too, if you've got an idea for somebody to be on the show, again, use that email that's on there. Of course, it's in the description too. But most importantly, for all you guys that are listening, you guys make the show. But from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for listening. For real.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
I earned my degree online at Arizona State University. I chose to get my degree at ASU because I knew that I'd get a quality education, they were recognized for excellence, and that I would be prepared for the workforce upon graduating. To be associated with ASU, both as a student and alum, it makes me extremely proud, and having experienced the program, I know now that I'm set up for success. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.